There is something a man learns after 40 years living on a mountain. Something that settles deep in the bones, deeper than cold, deeper than solitude. It is the difference between the wind's voice and a human cry. Even when that cry is barely a whisper, swallowed by the storm, a man who has lived long enough knows. Tobias McAllister knew. The snow fell thick that December evening in 1878, covering the Blue Ridge Mountains in a blanket so white it hurt to look at. Tobias moved through the drifts with the steady gait of a man who had walked these trails for decades. His boots, worn leather patched with rabbit hide, left deep prints that filled with fresh powder almost as soon as he lifted each foot. At 62 years old, his body still carried the strength of youth, muscles hardened by decades of splitting wood, hauling water, and surviving winters that killed lesser men. His beard, once the color of coal, now fell white and thick across his chest. Frost clung to it, making him look like some ancient spirit of the mountain itself. His eyes, pale blue and sharp as ice, scanned the tree line ahead. He was tracking a deer. The prints were fresh, maybe an hour old, and his stomach had been empty since dawn. Then he stopped. The wind shifted, carrying something that did not belong to the wilderness. Not the crack of a branch under a deer's hoof, not the distant howl of wolves. Something softer, something desperate. Tobias turned his head, listening with the intensity of a scout during the war. That war seemed like another lifetime now, though the scars still marked his shoulder and his dreams. He had served the Confederacy, not out of politics, but because these Virginia mountains were his home and his neighbors were his brothers. He had learned to listen then, to hear the approach of Union cavalry in the rhythm of hoofbeats miles away, to distinguish between the wind and the whisper of men preparing to kill. This sound was neither wind nor threat. It was human, and it was dying. He moved toward it without thought, his Springfield rifle shifting from hunting position to high ready. The deer could wait. Whatever made that sound could not. Through the veil of falling snow, he saw them. Two figures, half buried in a drift where they had collapsed, their bodies pressed together for warmth that would never be enough. Their dark hair, frozen stiff with ice, marked them as different even before he saw their clothing. Apache. He knew it instantly from the beadwork on what remained of their torn dresses, from the pattern of their moccasins still visible beneath the snow. For a single heartbeat, Tobias hesitated. Every man in these mountains spoke of the Apache with fear or contempt. Stories spread from town to town of raids, of violence, of savagery. The government had spent decades trying to contain them, moving them like cattle from one reservation to another. And here, impossibly far from any Apache territory, were two women freezing to death in his hunting ground. The choice lasted only that heartbeat. Tobias dropped to his knees beside them, his rifle falling into the snow. He tore off his bearskin coat, the one that had kept him alive through 15 winters, and wrapped it around both women. His hands, rough and scarred, worked quickly. One woman was younger, maybe 25, her face pressed against the snow. The other, older, had one arm thrown protectively over the first. Even in near death, she was trying to shield her companion. The older woman's eyes flickered open. Dark eyes, nearly black, met his pale blue ones. In that gaze, Tobias saw something he recognized. Not the wildness men spoke of when they told their Apache stories. He saw what he had seen in the mirror after Shiloh, after Gettysburg, after holding his dying son in his arms while the fever took him. He saw a person who had fought with everything they had and still might lose. She tried to speak. Her lips moved, cracked and bleeding, but no sound came. Tobias spoke instead, his voice rough from disuse. He lived alone and sometimes went weeks without speaking aloud. "I do not know where you came from. I do not know why you are here. But tonight we live or die together." He lifted the younger woman first. She weighed almost nothing, her body so light it terrified him. He had carried wounded soldiers who weighed more than this. He laid her across the back of the saddle on his horse, then returned for the older woman. She was heavier, stronger in build, but still far too light. She tried to grip his shirt as he lifted her. some instinct to fight or flee still alive in her, but her fingers had no strength left. The journey back to his cabin took 30 minutes that felt like hours. The wind howled with renewed fury, as if the mountain itself disapproved of his mercy. Snow drove into his face, stinging his eyes, but Tobias kept his head down and walked, one foot in front of the other. The way he had walked through his wife's death 15 years ago, the way he had walked through his son's death 5 years after that, the way he had walked through every loss and every lonely year since. His cabin appeared through the storm like a promise kept. Built from logs he had cut and shaped himself 30 years ago, it stood with its back against a wall of granite, protected from the worst of the wind. Smoke still rose from the chimney where he had banked the fire before leaving to hunt. The sight of it, solid and real, steadied something in his chest. Inside, the warmth hit like a physical force. Tobias laid both women near the hearth, close enough to feel the heat but not so close as to shock their frozen bodies. He had seen frostbite during the war. He knew what happened when frozen flesh warmed too quickly. He built up the fire until flames roared and light filled the small space. Then he brought blankets, thick wool that his wife had woven years ago, and wrapped both women like children. He heated water in his kettle and held the warm cup to the younger woman's lips. Most of it dribbled down her chin, but some went in. That would have to be enough for now. For the first time in hours, Tobias allowed himself to sit. His chair, worn smooth by decades of use, creaked as he settled into it. His rifle lay across his knees, not because he feared these women, but because instinct died hard and strange sounds in the night still made his hand twitch toward a weapon. Hours passed. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind began to die as the storm moved east. Tobias dozed, the shallow sleep of a soldier who never truly rested, and woke to find the older woman's eyes open and watching him. She stared at him for a long moment, her gaze moving from his face to the rifle to the cabin itself, taking measure, judging threat. Tobias recognized the calculation. He had done it himself 1,000 times. Slowly, never breaking eye contact, she reached for the knife on his table. Her hand shook with weakness, but determination carried her fingers to the blade's handle. She gripped it, though the effort made her arm tremble. Tobias did not move. He simply pushed the knife across the table toward her, close enough that she could take it properly. "If you plan to use it," he said, his voice quiet in the stillness, "then take it. But I would advise you to save your strength for whoever was chasing you." The woman's eyes widened slightly, not with surprise that he knew someone had been chasing them, with surprise that he said it aloud. Her fingers loosened on the knife. She did not take it, but she did not push it away either. "Why?" Her voice came out as a rasp, barely more than a whisper, but her English was clear. That surprised him. "Why did I help you?" Tobias asked. She nodded once. He thought about his answer, not because he did not know it, but because he wanted to give her the truth. "On this mountain, I do not ask who someone is. I ask who needs help." The woman studied him for another long moment. Then, without warning, she tried to stand. Her legs buckled immediately, and she would have fallen if Tobias had not caught her. He eased her back down to the blankets. "Your friend is still unconscious," he said, "and you are in no condition to go anywhere. We cannot stay." Her words came stronger now, urgent. "They will come." "Who?" But she had already turned to the younger woman, speaking rapidly in a language Tobias did not understand. Apache, he assumed, though he had never heard it spoken. The rhythm of it sounded like water over stones, musical despite the fear in her voice. The younger woman stirred, moaning softly. Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then snapping to full awareness as she saw Tobias. She tried to scramble backward, to put distance between herself and this strange white man, but the older woman caught her arm and held her still. More words in Apache, soothing this time. Tobias stood and moved to his small kitchen area, giving them space. He cut slices from the venison he had smoked last week and placed them on a wooden plate. Added some dried corn and the last of his bread. It was not much, but it was food. He brought it to them, setting it on the floor within reach, then retreated to his chair. "Eat," he said simply. The older woman looked at the food, then at him. Suspicion and hunger warred in her expression. Hunger won. She picked up a piece of venison and ate slowly, watching him the entire time. After a moment, she handed a piece to the younger woman, who ate with the same cautious watchfulness. Tobias ate his own portion, making his movements slow and obvious, showing them that the food was safe, that he shared what he had rather than hoarded it. The younger woman spoke for the first time, her words directed at her companion. "More Apache." The older woman responded, then looked at Tobias. "She asks why you help us." "I already answered that," Tobias said. "She wants to know if you have a wife, children." The question hit harder than he expected. He kept his face neutral, but something must have shown because the woman's expression softened slightly. "My wife died 15 years ago," he said. "My son 10 years ago. I live alone." The younger woman said something else. This time the older woman almost smiled. Almost. "She says then we are your best friends now." Tobias felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. Closer than he had come in months. "I suppose that is true." They ate in silence after that. The fire crackled and popped. Outside, the storm finally broke, and through the window stars appeared in gaps between the clouds. The temperature would drop even further tonight, cold enough to kill anyone caught outside. Cold enough that these two women would have been dead by dawn if he had not found them. When the food was gone, the younger woman curled up and closed her eyes, exhausted beyond measure. But the older woman remained awake. She pulled one of the blankets around her shoulders and sat staring into the fire. Tobias watched her watch the flames. After a time, he spoke. "You speak English well." "Missionaries taught me," she said without looking away from the fire, "before they were driven from our land." "And your friend?" "My cousin, Shyla. She speaks less." "What is your name?" She hesitated, then decided. "Nasha." "Tobias McAllister." She nodded, acknowledging the exchange of names. Then she turned to look at him directly. "How long have you lived alone, Tobias McAllister?" "Long enough to know that being alone does not kill a man, but losing purpose does." Something shifted in her expression. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "I lost many," she said quietly. "My father, my brother, my village." "And yet you fight to live." "That is all I have left to do." Tobias nodded slowly. "That is something I respect." They sat in silence again, but it was a different silence now. Not the wariness of strangers, but the quiet of two people who had both known loss and learned to carry it. Eventually, Nasha's eyes grew heavy. She fought it, clearly wanting to stay alert, but her body had limits even her will could not overcome. As she began to drift, she murmured, "They will come for us." "I know," Tobias said. "You should not die for us." "That is my choice to make." Her eyes closed. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep. Tobias remained awake. He fed the fire. He cleaned his rifle. He watched the darkness beyond his windows and listened for sounds that did not belong to the mountain night. Dawn came cold and clear. The storm had left nearly 2 feet of fresh snow, turning the world into a blank page. Nasha woke first. She sat up slowly, testing her body's responses, then moved to check on Shyla. The younger woman still slept, but her breathing was steady and her color had improved. Nasha turned to find Tobias watching from his position near the door. He had not slept, could not afford to, not when danger might arrive with the morning. She stood, and this time her legs held her weight. She was tall for a woman, he noticed, nearly as tall as him, and the way she moved, despite her exhaustion, spoke of strength and training. This was no helpless captive. This was a warrior. She walked to where his rifle leaned against the wall. Her fingers traced along the stock, professional, and knowing. "Springfield Model 1873, she said. "Good weapon." Tobias raised an eyebrow. "You know guns." "My father taught me. He fought against the Mexican army for 10 years. He believed his daughters should know how to defend themselves." "Your father was wise." "My father is dead." She said it without emotion, but Tobias heard the weight beneath the words. Killed by men who claimed to represent the law. Before Tobias could respond, Shyla stirred and woke. She sat up quickly, eyes wide, taking in her surroundings in the daylight. Nasha moved to her side immediately, speaking in Apache, reassuring her, explaining. Tobias stepped outside, giving them privacy. The morning was brutally cold, his breath hanging in clouds. But the sky was clear, and the sun on the snow was so bright it hurt to look at directly. He scanned the tree line, looking for movement, for tracks, for any sign that they had been followed. Nothing yet. But that did not mean nothing would come. He was checking the perimeter when he heard horses, distant still, but moving in his direction. Multiple riders. His hand went to his rifle automatically. He ducked back inside. "Someone is coming." Nasha was on her feet instantly. "How many?" "At least 5, maybe more." "Where can we hide?" Tobias moved to the corner of the cabin and pulled up a section of the wooden floor. Beneath was a small space, originally meant for storing root vegetables and preserves. "Here, stay quiet no matter what you hear." Nasha helped Shyla down into the space, then climbed in herself. Tobias lowered the floor and covered it with a worn rug and his chair. From above it looked like nothing but old furniture. The knock, when it came, was hard enough to shake the door in its frame. Tobias took a breath, set his face to neutrality, and opened it. 5 men sat on horses in his yard. The one in front wore a Union cavalry coat, though the war had been over for more than a decade. His face was hard, his eyes cold, a man used to getting what he wanted. "Morning," the man said, though his tone suggested anything but pleasantness. "I am Colonel Raymond Voss, Indian agent. We are tracking 2 escaped prisoners, dangerous criminals who killed 2 of my men. You see anyone unusual around here?" Tobias met his gaze steadily. "I live alone. I have seen no one." Voss studied him, eyes narrowing. "You are Tobias McAllister. I heard of you. Confederate scout. Lived up here since the war." "That is correct." "Then you know these mountains. You would notice strangers." "I would. And I have seen none." One of the men behind Voss, a younger deputy with nervous hands, pointed to the snow. "Colonel, there are small tracks here, leading to the cabin." Tobias kept his expression neutral. "Those are mine from yesterday. I walked that path checking my traps." Voss dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. He walked closer, invading Tobias's space deliberately, testing him. "You would not lie to a federal agent, would you, McAllister?" "I would not lie to anyone," Tobias said evenly. "But I have told you the truth. I live alone. I have seen no one." Voss stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, but it was the smile of a wolf. "I will leave men to watch this area. If you are lying, if you are harboring those prisoners, you will hang alongside them. Indian agent has broad authority in these territories. Do you understand me?" "I understand you perfectly, Colonel." Voss held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and remounted. "Let us go, but leave 2 men watching the approaches to this cabin. If anyone comes or goes, I want to know." The group rode away, but Tobias saw 2 riders peel off and take positions in the tree line, far enough to be unseen from the cabin, close enough to watch. He waited until they were gone, then went inside and moved the chair, lifted the floor. Nasha climbed out, her face grim. "You lied for us." "I told him what he needed to hear. He will come back." "I know. He will kill you if he finds us here." Tobias met her eyes. "Then we make sure he does not find you. From this moment you are not prisoners. You are my allies, and we prepare together." Nasha studied him. This white man with the gray beard and the soldier's eyes. This man who had chosen to risk everything for two strangers. Then slowly, she nodded. "Tell me about this man Voss," Tobias said. "Tell me what we are facing." And in the firelight of that cabin, as two men watched from the frozen forest outside, Nasha began to speak. To tell the story of raids and chains, of women sold like livestock, of a corruption that ran deeper than one man. And Tobias McAllister, who had lived alone for 15 years, who had thought his days of fighting were over, felt something old and familiar kindle in his chest. Purpose. The choice had been made. The line had been drawn, and whatever came next, he would face it standing. The fire cast dancing shadows across Nasha's face as she spoke. Outside, the two watchers remained hidden in the tree line, patient as stones. Inside the cabin, the warmth that had saved 2 lives now held 3 people bound by a choice that could not be undone. Nasha sat cross-legged near the hearth, her hands moving as she talked, painting pictures in the air. Sheila stayed close to her cousin, understanding more English than she spoke, her dark eyes following every word. "Colonel Voss is not what he claims," Nasha began. Her voice was steady, but Tobias heard the anger beneath it, the kind of anger that came from watching the world break its promises. "He wears the uniform of an Indian agent, but he serves only gold and greed." Tobias pulled his chair closer. His rifle rested across his knees, loaded and ready. Old habits. "Tell me everything." 3 months ago, men came to our camp. They wore uniforms. They said they were relocating us to new territory. Said it was government orders. Nasha's jaw tightened. We had heard these lies before, but they had soldiers. Real soldiers. We had no choice. "Where was your camp?" "New Mexico territory, near the Gila River. We were what remained of my father's band. 30 women and children. The men had been killed years before, fighting the Mexican army and then the American soldiers." She paused, her gaze distant. "We were no threat to anyone. We only wanted to live." Sheila spoke then, her English halting but clear. "They separate us. Take strong women. Leave old and young." Nasha nodded. 15 of us they chose. They said we were being sent to a reservation in Montana, but we never went to any reservation. "Where did they take you?" "To camps. Temporary prisons hidden in valleys where no one could see. They kept us in chains like animals." Nasha's voice dropped lower. "And they brought men. White men with money. They were selling us." The words fell into the cabin like stones into still water. Tobias felt something cold settle in his gut. He had seen evil during the war, had witnessed cruelty that still haunted his sleep. But this was different. This was not the chaos of battle. This was calculated, methodical. "How much?" he asked quietly. $2,000 per woman. Nasha met his eyes. "We were inventory, merchandise for the gold mines and the ranches out west, places where questions are not asked and workers disappear into the ground." "And Voss organized this?" "Voss and others. We heard names. A senator from Virginia, mine owners from Montana, men with power who saw us as nothing more than cattle to be bought and sold." Tobias was silent for a moment, processing. Then he asked the question that mattered. "How did you escape?" For the first time, Nasha almost smiled. Almost. "They underestimated us. They thought we were weak, broken." She held up her hands, and Tobias saw the scars on her wrists where shackles had cut deep. "But my father taught me that a warrior fights hardest when there is nothing left to lose." "What happened?" 2 nights ago they moved us. Said we were going to the final delivery point. 15 women in a wagon, 6 guards. They stopped to make camp in the mountains east of here, still in Virginia territory." Nasha's eyes hardened with the memory. "One guard got careless, came too close to check our chains. I took his knife." "You killed him?" "I did what I had to do." No apology in her voice, no regret. "In the chaos, Sheila and I ran. The others scattered in different directions. We ran north, into the mountains, into the storm. We thought the cold would stop them from following. But Voss came anyway. Men like Voss do not stop. Each woman represents $2,000. And more than that, we represent proof of his crimes. If we reach someone who will listen, who will believe us, his empire collapses. Tobias stood and walked to the window. Through the frost on the glass, he could just make out the tree line where Voss's men waited. He will not give up easily. No, Nasha agreed. He will come back, with more men, and he will kill anyone who stands in his way. The cabin fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Tobias turned from the window and looked at both women. Nasha, fierce and unbroken despite everything. Shyla, younger and more frightened, but still here, still surviving. This cabin, Tobias said finally, I built it 30 years ago when I first came to this mountain. I built it here, with its back to the stone cliff, because it can be defended. Nasha straightened, her warrior instincts recognizing strategy. You plan to fight? I plan to make them think twice about attacking. He moved to his small table and began sketching in the dust with his finger. The cliff behind us means they can only approach from 3 sides. The front is the most vulnerable, but it is also the most visible. We will see them coming long before they can reach the door. You said we, Nasha said carefully. You mean to fight beside us. I mean that if they come, we face them together. As you said, you are done running, and I am done watching evil men do as they please because good men stay silent. Something shifted in Nasha's expression. A calculation, perhaps, or recognition. She stood and walked to where Tobias had drawn his crude map. In Apache warfare, we do not meet our enemies head-on when they are stronger. We use the land. We use surprise. Show me. For the next hour, Nasha outlined tactics her father had taught her. How to create false trails, where to place obstacles that would channel attackers into kill zones, how to use the winter itself as a weapon. Tobias listened, impressed. This woman knew more about guerrilla warfare than most officers he had served under. Shyla joined in, her limited English supplemented by gestures and demonstrations. She showed them Apache methods for treating wounds using mountain herbs, how to move silently through snow. Small things that could mean the difference between life and death. As the morning stretched toward noon, the 3 of them worked. Tobias showed Nasha how to load and fire the Springfield, correcting her grip, teaching her to account for the rifle's kick. She was a quick study, her hands steady and sure. Your father taught you well, Tobias said as she hit a mark he had scratched into a tree 20 yards away. My father believed his daughters should be able to protect themselves. Nasha lowered the rifle. He died because he trusted men who wore uniforms and spoke of law. I will not make his mistake. They were preparing a second firing position when they heard movement in the forest, not the watchers, someone coming from a different direction, moving with purpose. Tobias grabbed his rifle. Nasha took position near the cabin wall, ready to disappear inside if needed. They waited. A single man emerged from the trees. He wore a deputy's badge, and Tobias recognized him as one of Voss's men from the morning. But this one came alone, his hands visible and empty. The watchers in the tree line shifted position, confused by their companion's approach. "McAllister," the man called. "I need to talk. I am alone and unarmed. Well, no pistol drawn anyway. I will not draw it if you do not shoot me." Tobias kept his rifle ready. "You have 30 seconds. The man stopped 15 feet away. He was young, maybe 35, with a face that had not yet hardened into the cruelty Tobias had seen in Voss. "My name is Cole Hartman. I rode with Voss this morning, but I am done riding with him." "Why?" "Because I did not sign on to hunt innocent women. I signed on to uphold the law. What Voss is doing, that is not law. That is slavery. And I will not be part of it." "You could be lying." "I could be," Hartman agreed. "But if I wanted to capture you or those women, I would have brought the others. I would have come with guns ready. Instead, I came alone to warn you. Voss is going to Bristol to get more men. He will be back tomorrow with 20 riders, maybe more. When he comes, he will burn this cabin to the ground and everyone in it." Nasha appeared in the doorway, her presence startling Hartman. He had clearly not expected to see one of the women he had been hunting. "Why should we trust you?" she asked. Hartman looked at her for a long moment. "Because 2 months ago I saw what Voss really is. I saw him sell a woman to a mine owner from Montana. She begged in English, told them she had children. Voss laughed and said children could be sold too, for less money but still worthwhile." He swallowed hard. "I have thought about that woman every day since, about what kind of man I am if I let it continue." "One woman's suffering moved you?" Nasha's voice was hard. "What about the others?" "It should not have taken even one. I know that. I was a coward. I told myself it was not my business, that I needed the job, that I could not fight the system alone." Hartman met her gaze. "I was wrong, and if I can help stop Voss now, maybe I can sleep at night again." Tobias studied the younger man. He had seen too much in his life to take people at their word, but he had also learned to read men in high stress, to see who would break and who would stand. Hartman had the look of a man who had made his choice and would see it through. "Come inside," Tobias said, "but slowly, and know that if you are lying, you will not leave this mountain." Hartman nodded and approached with careful steps. As he entered the cabin, his eyes took in the preparations, the weapons, the determination on 3 faces. "You plan to fight 20 men?" he asked. "We plan to make them regret coming," Nasha said. Hartman almost smiled. "Then you need more than just the 3 of you, and you need to know what you are up against." They gathered around Tobias's table. Hartman pulled out a piece of paper and began drawing a proper map. "Voss has a temporary camp about 12 miles northeast of here, in a hidden valley between this mountain and Bristol. He is keeping 13 more women there. The ones who scattered when you escaped, most were recaptured within a day. Only you 2 got away." Nasha's hands clenched into fists. 13 of my people, still in chains." "If we could free them," Tobias said slowly, "we would have witnesses, proof of what Voss is doing." "And we would have numbers," Nasha added. 15 women who know how to survive, who have reason to fight." "You are talking about assaulting a guarded camp," Hartman said. "There are 6 guards there full-time. Maybe more by now. 6 guards against 3 attackers with surprise on our side." Nasha looked at Tobias. "I have fought worse odds." "So have I," Tobias admitted. "But we need to be smart. We need information, and we need help." "I know someone," Tobias said after a moment. "In Bristol, Samuel Brennan. We served together in the war. If any man in that town can be trusted, it is Sam." "Then we go tonight," Nasha said. It was not a question. "Tonight we scout," Tobias corrected. "Tomorrow we act. We do this right or we do not do it at all." Hartman nodded. "I can get you into Bristol, and I can show you where the camp is. But after that, I am burned. Voss will know I turned against him." "Then you stand with us," Tobias said. "All the way." "I know." Hartman took a breath. "I am ready." They spent the afternoon preparing. Hartman revealed more about Voss's operation, names and places that painted a picture of corruption reaching far beyond one man. A senator in Richmond, mine owners in Montana, a network of men who had found profit in human misery and had no intention of stopping. As the sun began to set, turning the snow outside to gold and then to gray, Nasha found Tobias checking his rifle for the 3rd time. A soldier's habit. "You do not have to do this," she said quietly. "You could tell us where to find this Samuel. You could stay here, tell Voss you never saw us. You could live." Tobias looked up at her. The light from the fire caught the silver in his beard, made his pale eyes seem to glow. 15 years ago, when my wife died, I came to this mountain to be alone. I thought I wanted solitude, peace, an end to caring about anything beyond my own survival. And now? Now I remember what my father told me when I was a boy. He said a man's character is not measured by his words or his intentions. It is measured by what he does when doing nothing would be easier. Tobias stood, his full height impressive even in the small cabin. Doing nothing would be easier. It would be safer. It would let me keep my quiet life. But it would make me less than a man. And I am not ready to be less. Nasha held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly she placed her hand over her heart in an Apache gesture of respect. In my father's language we have a word, cochise. It means strong. It means honorable. It means someone who stands when others run. She dropped her hand. You are cochise, Tobias McAllister. I am just a man trying to do what is right. That is what cochise means. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the bond between them deepening from necessity into something more. Trust, maybe even friendship. Shyla called from the window. Someone comes. Tobias moved to look. Through the gathering darkness, a single rider approached, not from the direction of the watchers, but from deeper in the mountains. An old man on an older horse, moving with the ease of someone who had ridden these trails for decades. I know him, Tobias said with surprise. Red Sky Walker. He is Cherokee, lives alone in the high country. I have not seen him in 2 years. They watched as the old man rode right past the hidden watchers, who seemed uncertain whether to challenge him or let him pass. He made the decision for them by ignoring them completely, riding straight to Tobias's door. Tobias opened it before Red Sky could knock. The old Cherokee looked at Tobias, then passed him to Nasha and Shyla. His weathered face, brown as old leather and creased with 90 years of living, showed no surprise. 4 days ago, I rode to Bristol to trade furs. In the saloon, I heard Voss's men talking, boasting about hunting 2 escaped Apache women through these mountains. I knew then that the spirits were calling me to act. So I came to find you, Tobias McAllister, because I knew if anyone would stand against such evil, it would be you. It is true, Tobias said, and they need help. Then they have found the right man. Red Sky dismounted with surprising grace. The spirits told me something important was happening, that the mountain was waking from its long sleep. I see now they were right. He entered the cabin, and Nasha greeted him in a mixture of Apache and hand signs. Red Sky responded in kind, his gestures fluid and knowing. They spoke for several minutes while Tobias and Hartman watched, understanding none of the words but recognizing the respect being exchanged. Finally, Red Sky turned to Tobias. This woman tells me you have chosen to stand against evil men. Good. The land is tired of their footsteps. It is time for the mountain to remind them that some things are sacred. We could use your wisdom, Tobias said, and you shall have it. But more than wisdom, you need witnesses. You need the town to see what these men have done. Otherwise, Voss will simply tell new lies, and the circle will continue. We plan to free the captive women, Hartman said. That will be our proof. Good. But you also need the law on your side. The real law, not the corruption that wears a badge. Red Sky settled himself by the fire. In Bristol there is a marshal from Richmond, Benjamin Cross. He is investigating rumors of Indian Affairs corruption. If you can bring him proof, he will act. How do you know this? Hartman asked. Red Sky smiled, his face crinkling into 1,000 new creases. Old men are invisible. We sit in corners of saloons and people forget we have ears. I hear many things. Nasha knelt beside him. Will you help us, grandfather? I will do more than help. I will gather others. There are those in these mountains, red and white, who are tired of watching injustice. Give me 2 days, and I will bring you allies. We may not have 2 days, Tobias said. Voss returns tomorrow. Then we work fast. Red Sky looked around at the 4 of them. A Cherokee elder, an Apache warrior, a Confederate veteran, and a deputy with a conscience. The spirits have a sense of humor, bringing such people together. But perhaps that is the point. Evil divides us, but justice can unite anyone. As night fell fully and the temperature dropped below freezing, the 5 people in that cabin made their plans. Tomorrow they would ride to Bristol. They would find Samuel and Marshall Cross. They would scout the prison camp. And then, if the spirits and their own courage held, they would strike. Outside, the 2 watchers huddled against the cold, unaware that their quarry was no longer simply hiding. The hunted were becoming hunters. The frightened were becoming fierce. And on a mountain that had known only silence for 15 years, something old and necessary was being reborn. Not just the fight for survival, but the fight for what was right, for justice, for honor, for the things that made life worth living. Dawn came cold and clear to the Blue Ridge Mountains, the kind of cold that made breath hang in the air like smoke and turned snow to glass beneath boots. Tobias stood outside his cabin, watching the sun paint the peaks orange and gold, and knew this day would change everything. Some days a man could feel it in his bones, the way animals sense storms before clouds appear. Red Sky Walker had left before first light, riding back into the high country with promises to return with allies. The 2 watchers in the tree line had finally succumbed to exhaustion sometime after midnight, their discipline worn down by cold and boredom. They would wake soon, but by then their quarry would be gone. Inside the cabin, Nasha was checking weapons with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Shyla prepared food for the journey, her hands moving quickly despite the fear that still lingered in her eyes. Hartman stood by the window, watching the tree line, a man caught between 2 worlds and fully belonging to neither. "We leave in 10 minutes, Tobias said, entering. "The watchers are asleep. This is our window." Nasha looked up from the rifle she was loading. In the morning light, Tobias could see how young she truly was. Maybe 29, maybe 30. Too young to have seen what she had seen, too young to carry the weight she carried. But then, war and suffering had no respect for age. He had learned that at Shiloh when he was barely 20 himself. "Once we leave this cabin," she said, "there is no coming back, not as we were. I know. Voss will burn it, everything you have built here." "Logs and nails," Tobias said simply. "I have lost more important things. I can lose a cabin." They rode out as the sun cleared the mountains, 4 riders on a mission that would either save lives or end their own. The trail down from Tobias's mountain was narrow and treacherous, made worse by ice that formed overnight in the shadowed places. But Tobias knew every turn, every danger. He had walked this path for 30 years. Bristol appeared below them after 2 hours of careful descent, a town of perhaps 200 souls straddling the Virginia-Tennessee border, built where 2 rivers met and the land flattened enough for farming. Here in these mountains, state lines on maps mattered less than the bond between neighbors. Smoke rose from chimneys. The sound of a blacksmith's hammer rang clear in the cold air. Normal life, continuing as it always had, unaware that evil walked among them wearing official badges and speaking words of law. They approached from the north, avoiding the main road. Hartman guided them to the outskirts, to a blacksmith shop that sat slightly apart from the town proper. The sign above the door read, "Brennan's Forge," in letters painted years ago and touched up many times since. Samuel Brennan looked up as they rode into his yard. He was a big man, shoulders thick from decades of working iron, his beard more gray than black now, but his arms still corded with muscle. His eyes, sharp and knowing, took in the group and settled on Tobias with visible shock. "Tobias McAllister," Sam said, setting down his hammer. "I thought you were dead, or determined to die alone on that mountain of yours." "Sam." Tobias dismounted, and the 2 men embraced with the easy affection of soldiers who had faced death together. "I need help, the kind only an old friend can give." "Come inside then, all of you." Sam's eyes lingered on Nasha and Shyla, questions forming, but he asked none. Not yet. That was one of the things Tobias had always valued about Sam. He knew when to speak and when to wait. Inside the forge, Warmth from the banked coals filled the space. Tools hung on every wall, organized with the precision of a man who took pride in his craft. Sam poured coffee from a pot that had been sitting too long, but it was hot, and that was what mattered. "Now tell me," Sam said, settling onto a stool that creaked under his weight, "what brings you down from your hermitage with 2 Apache women and a deputy who looks like he has seen a ghost?" Tobias told him. Not everything, there was no time for that, but enough. The women found freezing in the snow, Voss and his lies, the human trafficking that turned people into property. The 13 women still held captive. As he spoke, Sam's face grew darker, the easy humor leaving it until only anger remained. "I heard rumors," Sam said when Tobias finished. "Whispers in the saloon about Voss's business dealings. But I thought it was exaggeration. Men talk, especially when they have been drinking. I did not think it could be true. Not here. Not in America." "It is true," Nasha said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I am the proof. My cousin is the proof. 13 more women are the proof, if we can reach them." Sam looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to a locked cabinet. From it he pulled pistols, ammunition, and a shotgun that had seen use but was well maintained. "If what you say is true, and I believe it is because Tobias McAllister never lied even when lying would have saved his life, then we have a duty. Not as soldiers, not as Americans. As men who believe some things are wrong no matter what uniform they wear or what law they claim to enforce." "You will help us?" Tobias asked. "Did you think I would not?" Sam began checking the weapons, his hands moving with remembered practice. "We stood together at Shiloh, at Chickamauga, at a dozen places where good men died for causes they barely understood. This cause I understand perfectly, and I will be damned before I stand aside." Hartman spoke up, his voice uncertain. "There is a marshal in town, Benjamin Cross, from Richmond. He is investigating corruption in the Indian Affairs Office. If we can bring him proof, he has the authority to act." "Cross," Sam said, nodding. "I know him. He arrived 3 days ago asking questions that made certain people nervous, Voss among them. If Cross is here, it means Richmond has finally noticed something wrong." "Can we trust him?" Nasha asked. "As much as we can trust any man with a badge." Sam looked at Hartman. Present company accepted, apparently. "You really turned against Voss?" "I really did." "Then you are either the bravest man I have met or the biggest fool. Time will tell which." Sam moved to the door, checking the street. "Cross is staying at the boarding house, but we cannot just walk up and tell him our story. He will want proof, evidence, something more than the word of a hermit, a blacksmith, and a deputy who went rogue." "We give him the 13 women," Tobias said. "We free them tonight. Bring them to Bristol. Let them tell their own stories." "The camp is guarded," Hartman reminded them. "Then we plan carefully." Sam grabbed a piece of charcoal and began drawing on his workbench, a crude map taking shape. "I know where Voss keeps his prisoners. There is an old trapper's camp about 15 miles northeast, in a valley where sound does not carry. Smart location for illegal activity. Now 6 guards, you said?" "When I left yesterday," Hartman confirmed. 6 against 5, if we count Red Sky when he returns. Better odds than Chickamauga." Sam looked at Nasha. "Can your people fight? If we free them, can they help us?" "They are Apache," Nasha said simply. "They will fight. Give them weapons, and they will fight until they win or die. That is our way." "Good." Sam added details to his map. "We hit them at dawn tomorrow. The hour when men are coldest, most tired, least alert. We come from 2 sides, create chaos, free the prisoners fast, then run for Bristol before Voss can organize a response." "And if Voss is there?" Nasha asked. "Then we deal with him." Tobias's voice was flat, final. "Whatever it takes." They spent the next hour refining the plan, going over details until everyone knew their role. Sam would provide weapons and supplies. Hartman would lead them to the camp and identify the guard positions. Tobias and Nasha would lead the actual assault. Sheila would stay behind with Sam, ready to treat wounded. As noon approached, Sam suggested they visit the boarding house. Marshal Cross takes his lunch there every day. We should at least let him know something is happening. Plant the seed, so when we bring him proof, he is ready to act. The boarding house sat on Bristol's main street, a two-story structure that had once been elegant but now simply served its purpose. Marshal Benjamin Cross sat alone at a corner table, a plate of stew growing cold in front of him while he read through papers covered in official seals. He looked up as they entered. His eyes, gray and sharp, assessed them in seconds. Late 40s, Tobias guessed, career lawman, someone who had seen enough of the world to be skeptical but not so much that he had become cynical. "McAllister," Sam said, keeping his voice casual. "This is Marshal Cross." "Marshal?" "Tobias McAllister. He lives up in the mountains." Cross stood, extending his hand. His grip was firm, testing. "Marshal, what brings a mountain man to Bristol?" "Information," Tobias said carefully. "About Colonel Voss." Cross's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Interest, maybe suspicion. "What kind of information?" "The kind that proves he is not the man he claims to be." "I am listening." "Not here," Tobias said, glancing around the room. Several townspeople watched them with open curiosity. "Tonight, after dark. Sam will bring you to a place where we can talk privately." "Why should I agree to a secret meeting based on the word of a stranger?" "Because you are investigating Voss," Tobias said quietly. "Because you have questions no one will answer. And because tomorrow morning I will give you proof that will end his career and put him in prison for the rest of his life. But only if you are willing to listen first and judge after." Cross studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Tonight, then. But know that if this is some kind of trap, I will respond accordingly." "Fair enough." They left the boarding house and returned to Sam's forge. The afternoon stretched ahead of them, hours to prepare and worry and wonder if they were making the right choice or the last mistake of their lives. Nasha found Tobias checking his rifle for the 4th time. "You are nervous," she said. Not a question. "I am cautious. There is a difference." "Is there?" She sat beside him on the bench outside the forge. The winter sun, weak but welcome, touched their faces. "When I escaped, when we ran into that storm, I thought I would die. I thought death would be better than returning to those chains. But you saved us. You, a stranger who owed us nothing. Any decent man would have done the same." "No," Nasha said firmly. "Any decent man would have told himself the excuses, would have said it was not his problem, not his fight, would have kept walking and let us freeze. You did not. And now you risk everything to free women you have never met. That is not decency, Tobias. That is courage. Or foolishness. Perhaps both." She smiled slightly. "My father used to say the line between courage and foolishness is drawn only after the battle is over. If you win, you were courageous. If you lose, you were a fool. But in the moment of choice, they feel the same. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was. And he died because of it. He trusted words on paper, believed in treaties and promises. The men who killed him wore uniforms just like Voss." Nasha's voice grew hard. "I will not make my father's mistake. I do not trust the uniform. I trust the man wearing it. And I trust you, Tobias McAllister." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the town go about its business. Children played in the street, their laughter carrying on the cold air. A wagon loaded with supplies rolled past, headed for destinations unknown. Normal life, beautiful in its ordinariness. Worth protecting, worth fighting for. As darkness fell, Marshal Cross arrived at the forge as promised. Sam led him inside, closed the doors, and lit lanterns that pushed back the shadows. In that circle of light, with the smell of iron and coal smoke surrounding them, they told Cross everything. He listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing. When they finished, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the night for so long that Tobias began to wonder if he would speak at all. Finally, Cross turned back to them. "I have been investigating Voss for 3 months. I have suspicions, rumors, hints of something wrong, but I have no proof, nothing that would stand in court. If what you tell me is true, if you can bring me those 13 women, I can arrest Voss. I can bring down his entire operation, but you need to understand something." "What?" Tobias asked. "If you assault that camp, if you free those prisoners, you are breaking the law. Technically, you will be criminals. I cannot sanction your actions. I cannot help you. The most I can do is be ready to act when you bring me the evidence. Do you understand?" "We understand," Nasha said. "We do not ask for your permission. We ask only that you be ready to do your duty when we give you the proof you need." Cross nodded slowly. "Then I will be at the church all day tomorrow. If you bring those women there, I will protect them. I will take their testimony. And I will arrest every man involved in this crime, no matter how high up the chain they sit." "That is all we ask," Tobias said. Cross moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it is worth, what you are doing, it matters. It will not fix everything. It will not erase what those women have suffered. But it will stop Voss from creating more suffering, and that is worth the risk." After he left, the 5 of them sat in the forge, feeling the weight of what lay ahead. Dawn would come early. The ride to the camp would take nearly 3 hours through darkness and difficult terrain. And then they would either free 13 innocent women or die trying. Sam broke the silence. "I have fought in battles where thousands died, where the ground ran red and the smoke was so thick you could not see 10 feet. This will be different, smaller, but somehow it feels bigger, more important. Because this time we choose the fight," Tobias said. "In the war, we followed orders. We went where we were told and fought who we were told to fight. This time, we fight because we decided it was right. That makes it bigger. That makes it ours." As the night deepened and the forge grew cold, they made their final preparations, checked weapons one last time, said prayers to whatever gods they believed in, and tried not to think about all the ways the morning could go wrong. Tomorrow would bring violence, would bring danger, would bring a reckoning that had been too long in coming. But tonight, in a blacksmith's forge in a small Virginia town, 5 people who should never have met prepared to stand together against the darkness. And in that standing, in that shared purpose, they found something more valuable than safety. They found meaning. The hours before dawn are the coldest, not just in temperature, though the mercury had dropped low enough to make breathing painful, but in spirit. These are the hours when doubt creeps in, when a man questions every decision that brought him to this moment. Tobias knew these hours well. He had spent too many nights before battles watching darkness fade to gray, wondering if he would live to see another sunset. They left Bristol at 3 in the morning, 5 riders moving through a world painted in shades of black and silver. The moon, 3/4 full, turned the snow-covered landscape into something from a dream, beautiful and cold and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Tobias rode in front, his breath clouding in the frozen air. Beside him, Nasha sat her borrowed horse with the easy confidence of someone who had learned to ride before she could walk. Behind them came Sam, solid and steady as the iron he worked. Hartman brought up the rear, his face pale but determined in the moonlight. Shyla they had left behind with instructions to have the church ready, to prepare for wounded, to be the anchor they would need if everything went wrong. "Another mile," Hartman said quietly. Sound carried strangely in the cold, and they all spoke in whispers now. "The valley opens up past those pines. The camp is at the far end, backed against the north ridge." "How many buildings?" Tobias asked. 3 structures. 2 are just canvas tents stretched over wooden frames. The third is an old trapper's cabin, stone foundation, probably 40 years old. That is where they keep the women. Easier to guard one building than multiple. And the guards? 2 on the cabin, 2 patrolling the perimeter, 2 sleeping in one of the tents, rotating shifts every 4 hours. The shift change happens at dawn, which means we have maybe 30 minutes before they are at their most alert, Sam said. We need to move fast. Nasha had been silent for the last hour, her mind clearly working through scenarios, planning moves the way a chess master plans 20 steps ahead. Now she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying absolute certainty. We do not attack the guards first. We go straight for the cabin. The women inside, they are our priority. Free them first, give them weapons, then we have numbers on our side. And if the guards notice us before we reach the cabin, Sam asked, then we adapt. Nasha's hand rested on the knife at her belt, a blade she had taken from one of Voss's men the night she escaped. But if we move like ghosts, if we use the darkness, we can be inside before they know we are there. They dismounted a quarter-mile from the camp and continued on foot. The snow muffled their steps but also made their tracks obvious. That could not be helped. Speed mattered more than stealth now. By the time anyone found their trail, they would either be long gone or dead. Tobias moved through the forest with the ease of 3 decades living in these mountains. Every tree, every shadow, every sound registered and was catalogued. Behind him, Nasha moved just as quietly, her Apache training serving her well. Sam and Hartman followed, doing their best to match that silence. They crested a small rise and looked down into the valley. There, just as Hartman had described, sat the camp. 2 canvas tents glowed faintly from lantern light within. The stone cabin sat dark and silent, a more permanent structure that spoke of earlier, more innocent use. Smoke rose from a fire pit between the buildings. 2 figures stood near it, stamping their feet against the cold, rifles slung carelessly over their shoulders. The 2 on patrol, Hartman breathed. The other 2 should be at the cabin door. Tobias scanned the darkness and found them. 2 men sitting on a bench someone had dragged outside, wrapped in blankets, clearly miserable but trying to stay alert. Their discipline was poor, good for the attackers, bad for their own survival. Sam and I take the patrol, Tobias said. Nasha, you and Hartman go for the cabin guards. Once we have the guards down, we break open that door and get those women out. Questions? Just one, Nasha said. Do we take prisoners? It was a fair question, a hard question. Tobias thought about it, about what these men represented, about what they had done and would continue to do if allowed. But he also thought about the difference between justice and revenge. If they surrender, we bind them. If they fight, we do what we must. But we are not murderers, Nasha. We are not like them. She nodded, though something in her eyes suggested she would have preferred a different answer, perhaps a simpler one. But she accepted his judgment, and that was enough. They moved down the slope like shadows given substance. Tobias and Sam circled wide to the west, using a line of scrub brush for cover. Nasha and Hartman went east, approaching the cabin from the side where darkness lay thickest. Tobias reached his position first. The 2 guards at the fire pit were talking in low voices, complaining about the cold, about Voss, about the job itself. Neither man seemed particularly invested in their duty. That would be their undoing. Tobias caught Sam's eye and nodded once. They moved together, years of fighting side by side making words unnecessary. 20 feet became 10, became 5. The guards never turned around. Tobias's hand clamped over the first man's mouth while Sam took the second. A brief struggle, a few muffled sounds, then both guards slumped unconscious. Not dead, but they would wake with splitting headaches and a hard lesson learned. Across the camp, Nasha and Hartman reached the cabin. The 2 guards there were more alert, sensing perhaps that something was wrong. One stood, his hand going to his rifle. Nasha was faster. She came out of the darkness like a striking snake, her knife finding the space between the man's ribs before he could cry out. He fell silently, and Hartman caught the body, lowering it gently to avoid noise. The second guard saw his companion fall and tried to shout a warning. Hartman's pistol butt caught him across the temple, dropping him like a stone. 4 guards down, 2 still sleeping in the tent. The odds had shifted. Tobias and Sam ran to the cabin, keeping low. The door was barred from outside, a heavy timber dropped into iron brackets. Sam lifted it clear while Tobias covered the tent where the remaining guards slept. No movement yet. No alarm raised. They still had surprise on their side. The door swung open on hinges that screamed for oil. Inside, darkness and the smell of unwashed bodies and fear. Nasha entered first, speaking rapidly in Apache, her voice urgent but controlled. Movement in the darkness. Chains rattling. Then a voice, weak but defiant. "Nasha, is it really you?" "It is me, and we are leaving. All of us. Now." Tobias struck a match, and in its flare he saw them. 13 women, ranging from perhaps 16 to 40, chained together at the ankles in a line that allowed minimal movement. Their faces, hollow from poor food and worse treatment, turned toward the light with expressions caught between hope and terror. "Sam, break those chains." Sam pulled a heavy set of bolt cutters from his pack, a tool he had brought from his forge. The chains were thick but poorly made, designed more for intimidation than security. They parted with loud metallic snaps that echoed in the small space. The women began talking all at once, questions tumbling over each other in Apache and broken English. Nasha raised her hand for silence. "Listen to me. We do not have time for explanations. The men who held you, some are unconscious, some are still here. We must move fast and quiet. Can you do this?" A woman near the front, older than the others with gray streaking her black hair, stepped forward. "We can run. We can fight. Tell us what you need." "What is your name?" Nasha asked. "Kaya." "Can you speak for these women, Kaya? Can you lead them if something happens to me?" "I can." "Good. Then lead them to the horses. They are tied a quarter-mile north. My cousin Shyla waits in Bristol with food and shelter. Go to her. Run and do not stop." "What about you?" "We finish what we started here." Outside, a shout. The sleeping guards had finally woken, alerted either by the noise or by instinct that something was wrong. Tobias stepped through the cabin door to see 2 men stumbling from their tent, rifles in hand, confusion written on their faces. "Drop your weapons," Tobias called. His Springfield was already aimed, steady despite the cold. "Drop them and you live. Fight and you die. Choose now." For a moment, the guards hesitated. Then one of them, younger and more foolish, raised his rifle. Tobias's shot came first. The report echoed across the valley like thunder. The young guard spun and fell, clutching his shoulder, his rifle forgotten in the snow. The second guard looked at his fallen companion, looked at Tobias's reloaded rifle, and let his weapon drop. "Smart man," Sam said, stepping forward to collect the rifle. "Now get on your knees and put your hands behind your head." The guard complied, his face pale. "Voss is going to kill you for this, all of you." "Voss is going to prison," Hartman said, emerging from the cabin. "And you are going with him. But that is tomorrow's problem. Tonight, you just get to live." They bound the conscious guards and dragged them into the cabin along with the ones still unconscious, locked them inside the same building where they had kept innocent women prisoner. There was a symmetry to that which felt appropriate. The 13 freed women gathered outside, some wrapped in blankets Sam had brought, others still wearing only the thin dresses they had been captured in. Kaya approached Tobias, and without warning, she took his weathered hand in both of hers. "I do not know why you did this," she said in careful English, "but I know what you risked. My people will remember. I will remember. For the rest of my life, I will tell the story of the white man who stood when others walked away." Tobias felt something catch in his throat. "Just get yourselves to safety. That is all the thanks I need." They moved out as the eastern sky began to lighten from black to gray. The women moved surprisingly fast despite their ordeal, driven by the promise of freedom and the fear of recapture. Nasha led them, her bearing that of a war leader, her presence giving them courage. Halfway back to Bristol, they met Red Sky Walker. The old Cherokee appeared from the forest with 6 other men, a mixture of Cherokee, Creek, and 2 white trappers who had lived in these mountains long enough to know injustice when they saw it. "I see you succeeded," Red Sky said, taking in the group of freed women with satisfaction. "We did. But Voss will know by mid-morning. He will come with everything he has. Then we make sure these women reach safety before he arrives, and we make sure Marshal Cross is ready to do his duty." Red Sky turned his horse to parallel their course. "The mountain is waking, my friends, and it is angry." They reached Bristol as the sun cleared the eastern peaks, turning the world gold and bright. The freed women, exhausted but unbowed, were taken to the church where Sheila waited with hot food and clean water and the kind of care that came not from duty, but from understanding. She had been where they were. She knew what they needed. Marshal Cross arrived within the hour, his face grim but determined. He interviewed the women one by one, taking statements in a small room while Reverend Hartwell stood witness. Each story added weight to the case, building an edifice of evidence that no corrupt official could topple. By noon, Cross had what he needed. He stood before the assembled group, his marshal's badge catching the light from the church windows. "With the testimony I have gathered here, I have sufficient cause to arrest Colonel Raymond Voss and everyone associated with his operation. I will be sending telegrams to Richmond this afternoon requesting federal marshals to assist. This goes higher than one man. There are senators, businessmen, officials at every level who enabled this. They will all answer for it." "How long before Voss knows?" Sam asked. "He probably knows already. Men like that have informants everywhere. He will come looking for these women, trying to recapture them or silence them before they can testify. We need to be ready." "We will be," Tobias said. "This town, these people, they deserve to know what has been happening in their midst, and they deserve the chance to stand for what is right." Reverend Hartwell stepped forward, a man of 60 years with white hair and eyes that had seen both the best and worst of humanity. "I will speak to the congregation, to the town. They will listen, and if they are half the people I believe them to be, they will stand with us." Through the afternoon, Sam and Reverend Hartwell worked with purpose. They went door to door, asking townspeople to lend any spare weapons. Old hunting rifles emerged from attics. War muskets wrapped in oilcloth were brought out from back rooms. The general store contributed 3 Colt revolvers and boxes of ammunition. In the church basement, Sam showed the Apache women how to load and fire each weapon. Their hands, though weakened by captivity, proved steady and sure. These were women whose fathers and brothers had been warriors. The skills lived in their blood, waiting only to be awakened. By evening, word had spread through Bristol like fire through dry grass. The truth about Voss, about the trafficking, about the women held in chains within a day's ride of their homes. Some refused to believe it. Some made excuses. But most, when confronted with 13 living women who bore the scars of their captivity, could not deny what stood before them. Men began to gather, not an army, but citizens. Shopkeepers and farmers, blacksmiths and teachers. Some brought rifles, others brought their presence, their willingness to stand and be counted. By sunset, more than 30 people had volunteered to help protect the freed women. Tobias stood outside the church, watching the sun paint the western sky in shades of orange and red. Beside him, Nasha looked out at the same sunset, her expression unreadable. "Tomorrow he comes," she said, not a question. "Tomorrow," Tobias agreed. "Are you afraid?" He thought about lying, about giving the brave answer, but she deserved truth. "I am afraid of failing, of these women being taken again, of this fight being for nothing. But I am not afraid of Voss. Men like him are cowards underneath. They only have power when people are too afraid to say no. And we are not afraid to say no. No, we are not." They stood in comfortable silence as night fell and stars began to appear. Inside the church, the freed women were being fed and clothed and told that they were safe. Outside, men prepared for battle, checking weapons and organizing watches. And somewhere to the south, Colonel Raymond Voss was surely gathering his forces, preparing to take back what he considered his property. But he would find Bristol different than he expected. He would find people who had drawn a line and refused to be moved. He would find that sometimes evil pushes too far, and ordinary people become extraordinary. The mountain had indeed awakened, and it would not go back to sleep until justice was done. They came at dawn, just as Tobias knew they would. 20 riders moving through the morning mist like specters of violence, their horses' breath steaming in the cold air. Colonel Raymond Voss rode at their head, his face carved from stone and fury. Behind him came hired guns, corrupt deputies, and men who asked no questions as long as the money was good. Tobias watched them approach from the church steeple, the highest point in Bristol. Beside him, Sam loaded rifles with the methodical care of a man who had done this too many times before. Below them, the town waited. Not with fear, but with something harder. Something that had crystallized overnight as word spread and choices were made. 20 men, Sam said quietly. Against what? 30 of us? Closer odds than Chickamauga, but those men down there are professionals, killers. And we have something they do not, Tobias replied. We have a reason to stand. They only have money. When it comes down to it, money makes men run. Reasons make them fight. Inside the church, the 13 freed Apache women waited with Nasha and Sheila. They had been offered the chance to hide, to let others fight this battle. Every single one had refused. Kaya had spoken for them all. We will not cower while others bleed for our freedom. Give us weapons. We know how to use them. Now they stood behind barricaded windows, rifles and pistols in hands that had suffered too much to tremble. Marshal Cross moved among them, his presence a reminder that law, real law, stood on their side now. Voss reined his horse in the town square, his voice carrying in the cold morning air. I am here for stolen property, federal prisoners who escaped custody, and the criminals who aided them. Surrender them now, and the rest of you can go about your business. Resist, and I will burn this town to the ground. Silence answered him. Then Reverend Hartwell stepped from the church, his white hair almost glowing in the early light. He was unarmed, but his presence carried weight that no weapon could match. Colonel Voss, the Reverend said, his voice calm but firm. You speak of law, but you serve only greed. We have heard the testimony of the women you imprisoned. We have seen the scars you left on their bodies and souls. In the name of God and human decency, I tell you to leave this place. Your authority is not recognized here. Voss laughed, a sound without humor. Old man, you do not get to decide whose authority counts. I have 20 guns behind me. What do you have? Farmers? Shopkeepers? They will scatter at the first shot. Then fire your shot, another voice called. Tobias emerged from the church, his Springfield rifle held easy across his chest. But know that if you do, you fire on people who have chosen to stand, and standing people do not scatter. They fight back. Voss's eyes fixed on Tobias with recognition and hatred. McAllister, I should have burned your cabin when I had the chance. I should have killed you in your sleep. You should have, Tobias agreed, but you did not, and now you face the consequences of that mercy. Sam appeared beside Tobias, then Hartman, then Red Sky Walker. One by one, armed citizens of Bristol emerged from cover. Not an army, but a community. Men and women who had decided that some things were worth defending. The balance of power that had seemed so clear moments before began to shift. Last chance, Voss snarled. Give me those women, or everyone dies. Marshal Cross stepped forward then, his badge gleaming. Raymond Voss, by the authority vested in me by the federal government of the United States, I am placing you under arrest for human trafficking, kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit murder. Surrender your weapons and dismiss your men." For a moment, genuine surprise crossed Voss's face. Then rage replaced it. "You have no jurisdiction over me. I am an Indian agent. My authority supersedes yours. Your authority ended the moment you broke the law you claim to uphold." Cross's hand rested on his pistol. "This is your final opportunity to surrender peacefully." Voss's answer came in the form of drawn steel. His pistol cleared its holster in a smooth motion, aimed not at Cross, but at Reverend Hartwell. The old man would be first to die, a message to everyone else about the price of defiance. But Voss never got the shot off. Nasha's rifle cracked from the church window. The bullet took Voss in the shoulder, spinning him in his saddle. Through the pain, his eyes found the shooter in the church window. Recognition hit him like a second bullet. The Apache woman, the one who had killed his guard and escaped, the one who had cost him thousands. His face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You!" he gasped, but his pistol fired wild as he lost balance, the shot kicking up dust harmlessly in the street. Behind him, his men reached for their weapons, and the morning exploded into violence. Tobias dropped to one knee, his Springfield barking. One of Voss's men fell from his horse. Sam's shotgun roared, the spreading pattern catching two riders who had bunched too close together. All around the square, townspeople opened fire from windows and doorways, from behind wagons and water troughs. The hired guns returned fire, but they had expected easy targets, frightened civilians who would break at the first sign of blood. Instead, they found determined resistance, coordinated fields of fire that spoke of planning and purpose. 3 more of Voss's men went down in the first 30 seconds. A bullet struck the wall beside Tobias's head, spraying splinters. He rolled left, came up firing, reloaded without thinking. Muscle memory from a war that ended 13 years ago but whose lessons never left. Beside him, Sam worked his weapons with the same practiced efficiency. Inside the church, the Apache women fired with deadly precision. They had grown up in a culture where warfare was survival, where a missed shot could mean death for your family. Every bullet they fired found its mark. Kaya, the eldest, called out targets in Apache, directing fire like a battlefield commander. The fight was brutal and close. Horses screamed and fell. Men shouted and died. The smell of gunpowder filled the air, acrid and choking. Voss, wounded but still dangerous, tried to rally his men for a charge on the church. If they could reach it, could breach those doors, they could use the women as hostages. Red Sky Walker stepped into his path. The old Cherokee had no rifle, only a war club that had belonged to his grandfather and his grandfather before that. The wood was dark with age and use, and as he raised it, he began to sing. An old song, a death song, the kind warriors sang when they knew they would not survive but chose to stand anyway. Voss fired at him. The bullet took Red Sky in the chest, but the old man did not fall. Not yet. He charged forward with the last of his strength and brought that ancient club down on Voss's knee. Bone shattered. Voss screamed and tumbled from his horse. Red Sky fell then, but he died with his enemy broken at his feet, and his death did something no speech could have done. It filled every defender with a fury that transcended fear. Tobias saw Red Sky fall and felt something break loose inside him. All the grief he had carried for 15 years, all the loss and loneliness and quiet despair. It focused into a single point of rage directed at the men who thought human life was just another commodity to be bought and sold. He charged forward, his rifle empty but his knife drawn. One of Voss's men tried to ride him down. Tobias sidestepped, grabbed the man's leg, and pulled him from the saddle. They hit the ground together, struggled, and Tobias's blade found flesh. The man went still. Sam covered Tobias's advance with his shotgun, the big man moving with surprising speed for someone his size. Hartman fought beside a shopkeeper named Davies, the two of them holding the north approach to the church. Citizens who had never fired a shot in anger discovered what they could do when everything they valued was threatened. The tide turned when Voss's men realized they were dying for a cause that meant nothing. Money mattered when you could spend it. It meant nothing when you were bleeding out in a Virginia street. First one man turned his horse and fled, then another. Within minutes, half of Voss's force was in full retreat. The rest surrendered. Tobias approached Voss where the man lay in the street, clutching his shattered knee, his shoulder still bleeding from Nasha's shot. The colonel's face was gray with pain and shock. All his arrogance, all his certainty of power, had drained away with his blood. "You should have let them go," Tobias said quietly. "You should have walked away. But men like you never do. You always push until someone pushes back." "Who are you?" Voss gasped. "Why do you care about these people? They are nothing, just Indians, just property." Tobias knelt beside him, his voice dropping even lower. "They are people. That is enough. And you are going to spend the rest of your life in prison learning what it feels like to be property." Marshal Cross arrived with iron shackles. As he locked them around Voss's wrists, the colonel tried one last threat. "You do not understand what you have done. This goes higher than me. Senator Whitmore, businessmen, mine owners. They will come for you. They will destroy you." "Let them come," Cross said. "I have 13 witnesses and a town full of people who will testify to what happened here. Your network is finished, Voss, and everyone connected to it will answer for their crimes." The morning sun climbed higher as they counted the cost. 8 of Voss's men dead, 5 wounded, including Voss himself. On the defenders' side, 3 men had fallen. Red Sky Walker, who had stood like a pillar. A farmer named Thomas who had 5 children waiting at home. A young deputy who had believed in Hartman's change of heart and paid for it with his life. They laid the dead out in the church, covering them with clean sheets. Nasha stood over Red Sky's body, her face unreadable. She spoke in Apache, words Tobias did not understand but whose meaning was clear. A warrior's farewell, a promise to remember. "He did not have to fight," she said when she finished, switching to English. "He was too old, but he chose to stand anyway." "That is what makes it matter," Tobias replied. "The choice. No one forced him. He saw wrong and decided to stop it, knowing what it would cost. That is the definition of courage." In the hours that followed, the town began to process what had happened. The wounded were tended. The prisoners were locked in the Bristol jail, guarded by Marshal Cross and a rotation of volunteers who took the duty seriously. The freed Apache women emerged from the church, no longer prisoners, no longer victims. They were survivors. And they were free. Kaya approached Tobias as afternoon shadows began to lengthen. In her hand she carried a beaded necklace, the kind Apache women made to honor warriors. She placed it around his neck without asking permission. "In our tradition," she said, "this marks you as family, as one who bled for the people. You will always have a place among us, Tobias McAllister, you and your friend Sam, and the deputy who chose honor over comfort. You are Apache now, in the ways that matter." Tobias touched the necklace, feeling the weight of it. Not the physical weight, which was barely there, but the weight of what it represented. Acceptance, belonging, things he had not realized he missed until they were given back to him. That evening, Reverend Hartwell held a service for the fallen. The church filled with people, and when the Reverend asked if anyone wished to speak, Nasha stood. "I did not know Thomas," she said, her English clear and strong. "I did not know the young deputy whose name I still do not know. I did not know Red Sky Walker before yesterday. But they knew something important. They knew that some things are worth more than safety, worth more than money or comfort or long life. They knew that standing for what is right, even when it costs everything, is what makes us human." She paused, looking around at the assembled crowd. "You could have let Voss take us. No one would have blamed you. We were strangers. We were Apache, and you have been taught to fear us. But you stood anyway. You fought anyway. And because of that, 13 women who thought they would die in chains will instead see another sunrise. That is not small. That is everything." When she sat down, there was not a dry eye in the church. Even the hardest men, The ones who had seen combat and loss and thought themselves beyond tears found their eyes wet. Marshal Cross stood next, his voice carrying the weight of authority, but also of respect. "I have sent telegrams to Richmond. Federal marshals are on their way to take custody of the prisoners. More importantly, I have sent the testimony of these women, along with my own report, to the Attorney General. Senator Whitmore and everyone connected to this trafficking network will be investigated. This may take months, but I promise you, justice will be done." "What about the women?" someone called from the back. "Where will they go?" Tobias stood. "They will go wherever they choose, but if any wish to stay in this area to build a new life here, I offer them land. There is space near my cabin, room for a village. I will help them build it if they want." Nasha met his eyes across the church, and something passed between them. Understanding, respect, maybe something more, though neither was ready to name it yet. "I will stay," she said, "and I will help build a place where Apache and white people can live as neighbors, can learn from each other, can be family." Others agreed. Not all 13 women. Some wanted to search for relatives or return to what remained of their tribes. But 8 chose to stay, to take Tobias up on his offer, to start fresh in these mountains that had been the site of their captivity but could now become the site of their freedom. As night fell and the church emptied, Tobias stood outside looking at the stars. The same stars that had looked down on battlefields and lonely cabins. The same stars that had seen him lose everything and, slowly, find something new to care about. Sam joined him, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He gave one to Tobias. "We did something today," Sam said. "Something that will be remembered." "We did what was necessary," Tobias replied. "Nothing more." "No, we did something extraordinary, and it cost us. But it was worth the cost." Sam sipped his coffee. Red Sky knew it. He sang his death song and walked into it anyway. That is the definition of a life well lived. To know what matters and to stand for it, even at the end. They stood in silence after that, 2 old soldiers who had survived one more battle. But this time they had fought for something clear and true, not for politics or territory or abstract causes. They had fought for human dignity, for the simple truth that people are not property and never should be. And they had won. The victory was not complete. Senator Whitmore and others still needed to face justice. The network Voss had built extended far beyond one town in Virginia. But tonight, in Bristol, 13 women slept in freedom instead of chains. A community had discovered its own strength, and ordinary people had proven that when they stood together, evil could be defeated. That was enough. That was everything. 2 weeks passed before Senator Edgar Whitmore made his move. 2 weeks of quiet that felt less like peace and more like the held breath before a storm. Marshal Cross had taken Voss and his men to Richmond for trial, but word traveled fast through networks of power and corruption. Men with influence and money did not go quietly into prison. They fought back. Tobias was splitting wood behind his cabin when the boy arrived, running hard enough that his breath came in ragged gasps. He was maybe 12, the son of a Bristol shopkeeper, and his eyes were wide with fear. "Mr. McAllister," the boy gasped, "Marshal Cross sent me. Says there are men coming, 15, maybe 20. They asked about you in town, asked where the Apache women went." Tobias set down his axe and pulled the boy inside. Nasha was there, grinding corn with Sheila, the 2 of them settling into the rhythms of a life that was beginning to feel almost normal, almost safe. At Tobias's expression, Nasha stood immediately, her hand going to the rifle that was never far from reach. "How much time?" Tobias asked the boy. "They left Bristol an hour ago, moving fast. Marshal Cross said they are not lawmen, just hired guns. Senator Whitmore sent them." Of course he did. Tobias moved to the window. Outside, the spring snow was melting, turning the trails to mud. That would slow the riders but not stop them. "Where are the others? The women from the new village?" "Marshal Cross sent riders to warn them. They are gathering at the church. Reverend Hartwell says it is the most defensible building. He is right. Tobias turned to Nasha. Get Shyla. Gather what weapons we have. We need to reach Bristol before they do. But Nasha shook her head, her face set with the determination Tobias had learned to recognize. No, we do not run to Bristol. We let them come here. There are only 3 of us, maybe 4 if we count the boy. I am not counting, the boy said quickly. My ma would skin me alive. Then 2 against 20, Nasha continued. But we have the cabin, we have the mountain, and we have something they do not expect. We have been preparing. She was right. Over the past 2 weeks, while the Apache women built their new village a mile away, Tobias and Nasha had not been idle. They had fortified the cabin, set traps along the approaches, created fallback positions. The lessons learned from Voss's attack had not been wasted. Send the boy back to warn Sam and the others, Nasha said. Tell them where we are, but we hold here. We make Whitmore's men pay for every foot of ground. Tobias looked at her, this Apache warrior who had become something more than an ally over these past weeks, something he was still afraid to name but could no longer ignore. You are sure? I am sure. This is my home now too, and I will not run from it again. The boy left at a sprint, carrying messages for Sam, for Marshal Cross, for anyone who would stand. Tobias, Nasha, and Shyla prepared for war. The hired guns arrived 2 hours later. 15 men, as the boy had said, led by a man whose face Tobias recognized from wanted posters. Captain Eli Granger, a Confederate raider who had never accepted the war's end and had turned his skills to whoever paid the most. A killer of the worst kind, the kind who enjoyed the work. They rode to within shouting distance and stopped. Granger, a lean man with cold eyes and a scar that ran from temple to jaw, called out in a voice that carried across the clearing, Tobias McAllister, we are here for the women you harbor. Senator Whitmore wants them returned to custody. Come out peaceful, give them up, and you can live. Resist, and we burn everything. Your choice. Tobias stepped out onto his porch, his rifle held casual but ready. Those women are not in custody. They are free citizens under the protection of federal law. You have no authority here. Authority is what a man takes, Granger replied, and I have 15 guns that say I have all the authority I need. Last chance, McAllister. Old men should know better than to die for lost causes. Maybe I should, Tobias agreed, but I never was particularly smart about knowing when to quit. His rifle came up and fired in one smooth motion. Granger's hat flew off his head, the bullet passing so close that the wind of it touched scalp. A warning shot. A statement. Next one does not miss, Tobias said calmly. So you make your choice, Captain. Ride away and live, or stay and learn what this mountain does to men who mistake age for weakness. Granger's answer came in the form of a dozen rifles rising to shoulders, but before they could fire, the forest itself seemed to explode with violence. The Apache women, all 8 of them, rose from positions in the trees where they had been waiting. Their rifles cracked in a coordinated volley that dropped 3 of Granger's men before the others could react. These were not victims anymore. They were warriors defending their home. Granger wheeled his horse, shouting orders, trying to organize a response. But his men were caught in the open, exposed, while their enemies had cover and high ground. Another volley. 2 more men fell. The remaining hired guns scattered, seeking shelter behind trees and rocks. Tobias reloaded and fired, reloaded and fired. Beside him, Nasha worked her rifle with deadly precision. Shyla, despite her fear, loaded weapons and passed them forward, keeping the rate of fire constant. The battle that followed was brutal. Granger's men were professionals, but they fought for money. The defenders fought for everything. There is a difference in such fighting, a difference that shows in who stands and who breaks. One of Granger's men tried to circle around to the cabin's weak side. He ran straight into a trap Nasha had set, a rope snare that jerked him off his feet and left him hanging upside down from a tree. His screams of fury and fear broke the confidence of the men near him. Another attempted to use fire, lighting a torch and throwing it at the cabin's roof. But the spring rains had soaked the wood, and the torch sputtered and died. Before he could try again, Kaya's bullet found him, and he fell without another sound. The fight lasted perhaps 20 minutes, but time moved strangely in combat. Every second stretched and compressed simultaneously. When it finally ended, when the last of Granger's men either lay dead or fled into the forest, the sudden silence felt almost painful. Granger himself remained, wounded in the leg, his horse dead beneath him. He dragged himself toward cover, and Tobias stepped down from the porch to stand over him. "You should have listened," Tobias said quietly. "Old men may not be fast, but we are patient. We know how to wait, how to prepare, and we have nothing left to lose, which makes us more dangerous than any young gun." "Whitmore will send more," Granger gasped. "He has too much at stake. Those women can destroy him." "Then let him send more, and more after that. Eventually he will run out of men willing to die for his crimes, or he will face justice. Either way, these women stay free." The sound of horses came from the trail. For a moment, tension spiked. Then Sam appeared, leading what looked like half of Bristol. Men and women, old and young, armed with whatever they could carry. Behind them came Marshal Cross with 4 federal deputies from Richmond. "Looks like we missed the excitement," Sam said, surveying the bodies and the wounded. His eyes found Tobias, checking him for injury. "You are getting too old for this, Toby." "So you keep telling me." Tobias allowed himself a small smile. "But apparently I have not learned to listen." Marshal Cross dismounted and walked to where Granger lay bleeding. "Eli Granger, I have wanted to meet you for 5 years. Now I get to arrest you for attempted murder, assault, and conspiracy. Your employer will be joining you shortly." "Whitmore is a senator," Granger spat. "You cannot touch him." "I received a telegram this morning. Senator Whitmore has been stripped of his position and is under indictment for human trafficking and conspiracy. The testimony of the 13 women combined with Voss's records proved sufficient. Your employer is finished, Captain, and so are you." As Cross's deputies secured the prisoners and tended to the few wounded among the defenders, the people of Bristol began to relax. What had felt like an ending was starting to feel like a beginning. The threat was not eliminated. There would always be men like Voss and Whitmore, but it had been beaten back. And in the beating back, something new had been forged. That evening, as the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Apache women gathered at Tobias's cabin. With them came townspeople from Bristol, Sam and Reverend Hartwell, farmers and shopkeepers, the Cherokee and Creek who had answered Red Sky Walker's call and stayed to help build the new village. They ate together, a communal meal where everyone contributed what they could. Venison from Tobias's hunts, corn ground by Apache hands, bread baked in Bristol ovens. It was not fancy, but it was shared, and that made it a feast. When the meal ended, Kaya stood. The firelight caught her face, showing the lines that suffering had carved, but also the strength that had carried her through. 6 weeks ago, she said, speaking in English so all could understand, I thought my life was over. I thought I would die in chains, my people forgotten, my story untold. But I am here. We are all here. And it is because ordinary people chose to be extraordinary. She looked around the gathering. Tobias McAllister, who found 2 freezing women and chose mercy over safety. Samuel Brennan, who opened his forge and his heart. Marshal Cross, who believed us when others would not. Reverend Hartwell, who spoke truth when silence would have been easier. And this town, Bristol, which stood together when evil came calling. Her voice grew stronger. In my father's time, our people fought against yours. There was blood and death and hatred on both sides. But here, tonight, we sit together. We eat together. We are learning that the color of skin matters far less than the content of character. That is a lesson worth fighting for, worth dying for, as Red Sky Walker showed us, and worth living for, which may be harder still. When she sat down, Nasha stood. She had been quiet most of the evening, but now she moved to stand beside Tobias. "I want to tell you about my father," she said. "His name was Mangas, which means sleeves. He was a war leader, but he was also a man who believed in peace. He thought treaties and words on paper could protect his people. He was wrong. The men who killed him did so while he was under a flag of truce, while he believed he was safe because promises had been made." She paused, and Tobias saw the pain in her eyes, old pain that had never fully healed. "For a long time I thought my father was a fool, that his belief in the goodness of others was weakness. But now I understand. He was not a fool. He was simply born into a world that had not yet caught up to his vision, a world where people kept their promises, where treaties meant something, where you could trust a man's word regardless of his skin color." Nasha turned to look at Tobias. This man kept his word. He said he would protect us, and he did. He said he would stand, and he stood. Because of him, I learned something my father tried to teach me, but I was too angry to hear. There are good people in every race, and when good people stand together, they can change the world. She reached out and took Tobias's weathered hand in hers. The gesture was simple but profound, witnessed by everyone present. A bridge between two worlds, a promise of something new. "I am staying here," Nasha continued, "in this valley, on this mountain, not as a prisoner, not as someone who has nowhere else to go, but as someone who has chosen this place, chosen these people. This is my home now, and I will defend it as fiercely as I would defend the land of my birth." The gathering broke into murmurs of approval. Plans were made for the spring. The Apache village would be expanded, fields would be planted, children, both Apache and white, would attend school together. It would not be perfect, there would be misunderstandings and conflicts, but it would be real. It would be hope made tangible. As the night deepened and people began to drift toward their homes, Tobias and Nasha found themselves alone on the cabin porch. The stars above were the same stars that had watched empires rise and fall, wars fought and ended, eternal and indifferent. But on this small patch of Virginia mountain, under those distant lights, two people who should have been enemies sat side by side in comfortable silence. "What will you do now?" Nasha asked finally. "Now that the fighting is over?" "I will do what I always did. Hunt, chop wood, live." Tobias looked at her. "But maybe not alone anymore, if that is acceptable." "It is acceptable." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "I may need someone to teach me how to survive mountain winters, and you may need someone to teach you that survival is not the same as living. That sounds like a fair trade." They sat a while longer, watching the stars wheel overhead. In the valley below, lights from the new Apache village twinkled like earthbound stars. Bristol's lamps glowed warm in the distance. Somewhere out there, Senator Whitmore sat in a cell. His empire of cruelty collapsed. Colonel Voss awaited trial, and 13 women who had been property were now free. It was not a perfect ending. Red Skywalker was still dead, buried on the mountain he loved. 3 men from Bristol had fallen defending their neighbors. The trauma the Apache women carried would not vanish with their chains. Justice was slow and imperfect, and there were countless other victims who would never be saved. But it was enough to matter, enough to prove that evil could be defeated if only people would stand. Tobias thought about his son, dead these 10 years from fever, about his wife, gone 15 years, about all the losses that had driven him to this mountain seeking solitude and finding only emptiness. He had thought his story was over, that his remaining years would be nothing but waiting for death. How wrong he had been. His story was not over. It had simply been waiting for the right chapter to begin. And this chapter, this unexpected alliance between an aging soldier and a fierce Apache warrior, between a Virginia town and displaced women seeking home, between people who should have been divided but chose to be united, this was the chapter that gave everything meaning. "My father once told me something," Nasha said softly. "He said that a person's worth is not measured in the battles they win or the enemies they defeat. It is measured in the lives they touch, the people they save, the hope they create." Your father was wise. He was. And he would have liked you, Tobias McAllister. He would have called you brother. I would have been honored. They sat in silence again, but it was a full silence. Not empty like the years Tobias had spent alone, but rich with possibility, with friendship, and perhaps, in time, something more. Neither was young. Both carried scars. But scars were proof of survival, and survival was the first step toward healing. In the months and years that followed, the story of what happened in Bristol would spread. It would be told in saloons and churches, at dinner tables and around campfires. Some would embellish it, adding details that never happened. Others would diminish it, uncomfortable with heroes who did not fit their expectations of what heroes should look like. But the truth remained, solid as the mountain itself. When evil came to Bristol, ordinary people became extraordinary. When darkness threatened to swallow hope, they chose to be light. And when it would have been easier to look away, to say it was not their problem, they stood and said no. That legacy would outlive them all, carried forward in the Apache children who grew up free, in the town that learned what it meant to protect the vulnerable, in every person who heard the story and decided that they too could stand when the moment came. In the years that followed, each of those who stood that winter found their own peace. Marshal Benjamin Cross returned to Richmond with evidence that dismantled the trafficking network completely. His testimony before Congress led to reforms that protected thousands. He visited Bristol every spring, always stopping at the mountain to share a meal with old friends. Reverend Joshua Hartwell's church became a bridge between two peoples. On Sundays, Apache families sat beside white families, their children playing together after services. The Reverend's sermons spoke often of the winter when Bristol learned that faith without action was empty, when ordinary people became the hands of justice. Sam Brennan's forge rang with the sound of hammers on steel, now wielded by apprentices both white and Apache. Young men learned metalwork there, but more importantly, they learned what it meant to stand for what was right. Sam never spoke much of his role in the fight. When asked, he would simply say, "I helped some friends." That is what neighbors do. As dawn broke over the Blue Ridge Mountains on another spring day, Tobias McAllister stood outside his cabin watching light return to the world. He was 62 years old. His beard was white, his hands scarred, his body marked by decades of hard living. But his heart, which had felt dead for so long, beat with purpose again. Beside him, Nasha emerged from the cabin, her hair still loose from sleep, her eyes clear and calm. Together they watched the sun paint the peaks gold and orange, watched smoke begin to rise from the village below, watched the world wake to another day of possibility. "Are you ready?" she asked. "For what?" "For everything that comes next. The work, the challenges, the building of something new." Tobias smiled, really smiled, in a way he had not since his wife was alive. "I am ready." And he was. Whatever came next, whether peace or conflict, joy or sorrow, he would face it not alone but alongside people he had chosen and who had chosen him. That made all the difference. That made everything possible. The mountain's honor had been defended. Now it was time to see what could be built on that foundation. Time to prove that the best answer to hatred was not more hatred, but community. That the proper response to cruelty was not cruelty in return, but compassion. That the way to defeat those who divided people was to unite them. It would not be easy. But nothing worthwhile ever was. And Tobias McAllister, who had thought his story was ending, discovered it was only just beginning.